Colin always said he was definitely not like that. That was his phrase. Not gay, not curious, not experimenting. Definitely not like that. The funny thing is, if you only listened to his words, you'd believe him. But if you really watched him, you'd start noticing things. Small things. The kind of things you can't unsee once they register. I'm Ian, by the way, and this all started about 8 months ago, when Colin moved into the apartment across the hall from mine. He showed up on a Saturday afternoon with a pickup truck, 2 duffel bags, and a couch that was clearly too big for the stairwell. I was coming back from the gym when I saw him struggling with it alone. "You need help?" I asked. He looked up at me, a little sweaty, a little irritated, but still managing this crooked half-smile. "Nah, I got it." The couch slipped, nearly crushed his foot. I raised an eyebrow. "You definitely don't got it." That was our first real interaction. We carried the thing up together, bumping into walls, laughing when we almost dropped it. He was stronger than he looked, broad shoulders, thick forearms, that quiet athletic build that doesn't scream gym bro but definitely lives there. After we finally got it inside, he clapped me on the back. "Appreciate it, man. I'm Colin. Ian." We shook hands. His grip lingered just a second too long. I noticed. I always notice. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Guys sometimes overdo the handshake thing. Testosterone theater. But over the next few weeks, Colin started knocking on my door for the smallest reasons. "Hey, you got a screwdriver? Hey, do you know the Wi-Fi password for the building? Hey, wanna grab a beer? I don't feel like drinking alone." That last one became a regular thing. We'd sit on my balcony most nights, cheap beers sweating in our hands, city noise humming below us. He told me he'd just moved for a new job, construction project manager. Said he'd broken up with his girlfriend back home because distance never works. He made sure to emphasize girlfriend. I didn't come out to him right away. I've learned to test the waters first. Some guys get weird. Some get quiet. Some start acting like you're about to jump them at any moment. But Colin didn't give off that vibe. He talked about women constantly, but in this exaggerated way. Like he was reading from a script. "Dude, you should have seen the bartender last night," he'd say. "Insane body." I'd nod. Yeah, crazy." But he never described anything specific. No details, just broad statements. Like he thought that's what straight guys were supposed to say. One night, about a month in, we were halfway through a 6-pack when he asked, casually, "So, you seeing anyone?" There it was. I shrugged. "Not right now." He stared at me for a second. "You into girls who are like super feminine? Or more like sporty?" I looked at him carefully. "Neither." He blinked. "Neither. I'm gay, Colin." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. "Oh," he said. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Cool. That's cool." No awkward laugh. No weird tension. Just cool. But he didn't leave. Didn't make an excuse. Didn't suddenly remember he had somewhere else to be. Instead, he asked, "So how'd you know?" That's when I really started paying attention. Most straight guys don't ask follow-up questions like that. They either shut down the topic or turn it into a joke. But Colin, he listened. I told him about high school, about my first crush on a guy in my soccer team, about how long it took me to admit it to myself. He was quiet the entire time, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on me. "You ever wish it was different?" he asked softly. I shrugged. Sometimes. It would have been easier. But no, not really. He nodded slowly. Then he said the line that would become his trademark. "I mean, I'm definitely not like that. But I respect it. Definitely not like that." I smiled. "Didn't say you were." From that night on, something shifted. He started coming over more. Not holding. Not grabbing. He asked, "So like, when you look at a guy, what do you notice first?" I almost laughed. "You taking notes?" He smirked. "Just curious." "Depends." Eyes. Smile. "Shoulders." He glanced down at his own shoulders. Subtle. Almost involuntary. "You think I've got good shoulders?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I took a sip of beer to hide my grin. Yeah, you do. His jaw tightened for a second. Not uncomfortable. More like charged. I work out, he said quickly. But not for that. For what? For guys. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't say you did. He exhaled through his nose, almost frustrated. I'm not gay, Ian. I know. But the thing is, his words said one thing. His actions, they were starting to tell a completely different story. And I had a feeling it was only a matter of time before one of them won. About 2 weeks after I came out to him, Colin started working out with me. That was his idea. I usually go to the gym around 7 p.m. after work. It's not too crowded, not dead either. Enough people that you blend in. I like that. One evening, as I was tying my shoes by the door, he knocked. You heading out? Yeah. He hesitated for half a second. Mind if I tag along? I looked up at him. Thought you had your own routine. He shrugged. Bored of it. That was the beginning. First, it was normal. We lifted. He spotted me on bench. I spotted him. He'd stand just a little too close when guiding the bar back into the rack. The first time it happened, I told myself I was imagining the tension. The 5th time? Not so much. In the locker room, though, that's where things got interesting. I'm not shy about changing. I've been out long enough that a locker room doesn't faze me. I'm respectful. Eyes up. Do my thing. Colin, on the other hand, suddenly became very aware of everything. You ever spend time with guys from the gym? He asked, voice steady. Sometimes. He swallowed. I saw it in the mirror. Like, random. Yeah. He nodded slowly. Huh. Then, after a beat, I don't get how that works. I met his eyes in the reflection. What part? Like, how you know? If someone's into it. You can usually tell. How? They look at you differently. He held my gaze for a long second. Differently how? I stepped closer to the sinks, closing the distance between us just slightly. Like they're trying not to. His breathing changed. Subtle but there. He looked away first. I'm definitely not like that, he muttered. Of course. Definitely not. But the next week he started texting me late at night. Nothing explicit. Just random things. You up? Can't sleep. You ever think people can change what they're into? That last one sat on my screen for a full minute before I responded. Physically, 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Yeah. I typed slowly. I think people figure themselves out at different speeds. He didn't reply for almost 5 minutes. Then, I've never looked at a guy like that. I stared at that sentence. Like what? Another pause. Like how I look at girls. I didn't push. Didn't challenge him. Okay. But the next day at the gym, he was different. More restless. More physical. During leg presses, he stood over me, hands on the machine handles, leaning in too close while explaining form adjustments I didn't ask for. Keep your knees out, he said, voice lower than usual. I am. More. When I finished the set, I sat up. Our faces were inches apart. He didn't move. I could feel his breath. Warm. Slightly uneven. You ever? He started, then stopped. Ever what? He searched my face like he was looking for permission to continue. Ever wish someone wasn't gay? The question hit harder than I expected. I leaned back slightly. Why? Just asking. I studied him carefully. No. Why would I? He shrugged, but there was tension in his jaw. Would make things simpler. For who? For everyone. I didn't respond right away. I'm not gay, Ian. I know. But you, he ran a hand through his hair. You look at me sometimes. There it was. I held his gaze. Yeah. He didn't breathe for a second. You can't, he said, but it didn't sound like anger. It sounded like fear. Why not? Because I'm not like that. Then it shouldn't matter. His chest was rising faster now. It doesn't, he said quickly, but he didn't step back, didn't create space, and that's when I knew. Colin could say he was definitely not like that as many times as he wanted. But his body was starting to disagree. After that moment in the gym, Colin pulled back. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But I did. He still worked out with me. Still came over for beers. Still sat close. But there was a new edge to him, like someone gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, afraid they might swerve if they loosened up. He talked more about women. Louder. With more confidence than before. Met this girl at work, he said one night, feet up on my coffee table. Blonde. Real pretty. Yeah, I replied. She laughed at all my jokes. That's usually a good sign. Usually. He glanced at me. You don't sound convinced. I'm just listening. He frowned slightly, like that wasn't the reaction he wanted. A week later, he brought her up again. Same girl. Same vague details. Never a name. Never a story that went anywhere. Then, one Friday night, he came over buzzed. You ever feel like people expect you to be a certain way? He asked, slumping onto the couch beside me. All the time. He leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. Like if you don't fit that version, everything gets messed up. I turned toward him. You talking about work? Family? His jaw clenched. Life. Silence settled between us. Comfortable. Heavy. Ian? He said. Yeah. You ever had a straight friend who? He trailed off. Who what? He swallowed. Who crossed a line? I didn't answer right away. I chose my words carefully. I've had friends who were confused. He turned his head to look at me. What did you do? I let them figure it out. And if they didn't? Then nothing happened. He nodded slowly. But if they did? I met his eyes. Then we talked about it. His knee was bouncing now. Nervous energy. Hypothetically, he said, if a guy wasn't gay, but he kept thinking about stuff he shouldn't. Thinking isn't doing, I said gently. He exhaled like I'd taken weight off his chest. And if he liked it? I held his gaze. Then that's information. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. You make it sound so simple. It's not, I said. But it's honest. He went quiet after that. Didn't come over the next day. Or the day after. On the third day, there was a knock on my door just after midnight. When I opened it, Colin was standing there in a hoodie and gym shorts, eyes a little red, jaw tight. I need to talk, he said. I stepped aside. Come in. He didn't sit right away. Paced my living room instead, running a hand through his hair like he was trying to scrub a thought out of his head. I can't stop thinking about it, he said finally. About what? About you. There it was. Out in the open. No qualifiers. I stayed where I was. Didn't approach. Didn't retreat. Thinking how? I asked. He turned to face me, frustration written all over his face. That's the problem. I don't know. He took a breath. I've never wanted to be close to a guy like this. Never cared if one noticed me. Never. He stopped himself, shaking his head. I keep telling myself I'm not like that. I said nothing. But then I catch myself wondering what you're thinking. Or if you're looking at me. Or what it would be like if he cut himself off again. Fists clenched at his sides. I spoke softly. Colin, you don't have to prove anything to me. That's just it, he said. I don't want this to mean something, he said quietly. What if it already does? I asked. His eyes searched mine like he was bracing for impact. What if I can't go back? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, you don't have to decide everything tonight. He laughed under his breath. Funny thing is, I think I already have. Before I could respond, he reached out not to grab, not to pull but to rest his hand against my wrist. Just that. A simple, deliberate touch. His thumb brushed my skin, tentative like he was testing whether the world would end. Didn't. He looked down at our hands, then back up at me, eyes wide not with fear this time, but something closer to relief. I'm still not gay, he said, almost pleading. I gave a small smile. You don't have to label anything. He nodded slowly, but he didn't let go. And for the first time since I met him, Colin stopped saying he was definitely not like that and started acting like he wasn't so sure anymore. Colin stayed the night. Not like that. Not even close. He sat on my couch until almost 3 in the morning, hoodie sleeves pulled over his hands, talking in circles like if he kept moving, he wouldn't fall straight down into whatever this was. We talked about everything except the thing sitting between us. Work, music, his childhood, my ex from a few years back. He listened more than he spoke, like he was studying how I existed in the world, as if that might explain something about himself. When he finally stood up to leave, he hesitated at the door. "This doesn't make me gay," he said again, quieter now, less defensive. I met his eyes. "It doesn't have to make you anything." He nodded, relieved in a way that almost hurt to watch. "Okay." But the next morning, everything felt different. He texted first. "You up? Yeah. Wanna grab coffee before work?" That became our new thing. Morning coffee. No beers. No late nights. Daylight, like he was trying to prove to himself that whatever this was could exist under the sun. Except he started doing little things he didn't notice. He'd brush past me instead of going around. Let his knee rest against mine when we sat. Lean in too close when I showed him something on my phone. Once, while laughing at something stupid I said, he grabbed my forearm instinctively. Didn't let go right away. Then there was the jealousy. It showed up quietly at first. I mentioned a date. Nothing serious. Just a guy I'd met for drinks. Colin went silent. "How was he?" he asked eventually. "Nice," I said. "Not really my type." His shoulders relaxed before he could stop it. Yeah. He nodded, trying to play it cool. "Good." But that night at the gym, he pushed harder than usual. He kept adding weight, competing with me in a way he never had before. When I finished a set, he stepped in close, chest rising fast. "You still seeing him?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Just asking." I wiped sweat from my neck. "We went out once." His jaw tightened. "You gonna see him again?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Why?" He looked away. "No reason." But the reason was written all over him. A few days later, he came over after work, restless again, pacing, same as before. "I can't do this halfway," he said suddenly. "Do what?" This time he didn't avoid it. He stepped closer, close enough that there was no pretending. "This," he said, "whatever this is." My heart picked up. "What are you saying?" He swallowed hard. "I need to know." "Know what?" He met my eyes, and for once, there was no rehearsed line. No, definitely not like that. Just honesty, raw and shaky. "What it would feel like," he said, "if I let myself stop fighting it." The room felt smaller. I didn't touch him, didn't move. "Colin," I said carefully, "you don't owe me anything, and I won't be something you try once just to prove a point." He shook his head immediately. "That's not. I'm not trying to experiment." "Then what are you trying to do?" He exhaled, long and slow. "I'm trying to stop lying to myself." That was the moment. The moment his words finally caught up to his actions. When he leaned in, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was hesitant, almost reverent, like he was stepping onto unfamiliar ground barefoot. He stopped inches from my face. "If I do this," he whispered, "I don't know who I am afterward." I answered just as quietly, "You'll still be you." That was all he needed. "Oh," he breathed. Not regret. Recognition. And in that moment, Colin didn't say he wasn't like that. He didn't say anything at all. He just stood there, shaking slightly, staring at me like he was seeing himself clearly for the first time. Colin didn't leave right away. After that kiss, we stood there in silence, the air between us thick and unfamiliar. He kept rubbing his thumb against his palm like he was trying to ground himself. "I didn't hate it," he said finally, almost surprised by his own words. I smiled gently. "I didn't think you would." He let out a shaky laugh. "That's not helping." "Sorry," I said, though I wasn't. He sank down onto the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "I've spent my whole life being so sure of who I'm supposed to be, and now one moment just messed with all of it." I sat down too, leaving space between us, letting him breathe. "You're not broken," I said. "You're just learning something new." He nodded slowly. That's the scary part. For a while, that was how it went between us, moments of closeness followed by long stretches of him retreating into his head. He'd pull me in, then pull himself back. Like he was testing how far the tide could come in before he panicked. But he kept choosing to come back. We didn't talk about labels, didn't define anything. We just existed in this quiet in-between. Sometimes that meant sitting shoulder to shoulder on my couch, watching a show neither of us cared about. Sometimes it meant long looks that lingered a second too long. Once he fell asleep during a movie, head tipping onto my shoulder. He stiffened when he realized. "Sorry," he said quickly, starting to move. "Don't," I said softly. He hesitated, then relaxed again. Let himself stay. He was quieter than usual, thoughtful. "I had a dream," he said as we drank coffee. "About?" He glanced at me, then looked away. "You." I didn't press. At the gym later that day, everything was heightened. "You ever regret coming out?" he asked suddenly. "No," I said. "It was hard, but it was honest." He nodded. "I keep thinking, if I don't deal with this, it's just going to follow me." I leaned against the bench. "Yeah, it usually does." He met my eyes. "I don't know where this ends." I shrugged gently. "You don't have to know yet." That night, he knocked on my door again. No pacing this time. No frantic energy. "I just need to say this out loud," he said. "Okay." He took a breath. "I still don't know what this means, but I know I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. And I don't want to push you away just because I'm scared." My chest tightened. "Colin," he held up a hand. "I'm not asking for answers. I'm asking for patience." I nodded. "You've got it." He smiled then. Real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes. "I guess my actions really have been saying more than my words." I smiled. "They have." And for the first time since I met him, Colin didn't argue with that. He just stayed. The first time Colin reached for me without hesitation, it wasn't dramatic. No speech. No internal battle written across his face. We were standing in my kitchen. Late. Quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat if you focus hard enough. He was leaning against the counter, watching me rinse a glass. "You're not looking at me like I'm fragile anymore," he said. I glanced over my shoulder. "You're not acting like you are." He smiled at that. Small. Private. The thing about Colin was once he stopped fighting something, he didn't half commit. That was true at work, at the gym, with everything. And now, it was starting to be true with this. Over the next couple weeks, he stopped making disclaimers. No more "I'm definitely not like that." No more overcompensating stories about random girls. Instead, he asked real questions. "Did you ever feel guilty at first? Were you scared people would see you differently? Did it change your friendships?" He wasn't asking to debate anymore. He was asking because he was seeing himself in the answers. One night, after we'd been lying on my couch talking for hours, he turned on his side to face me. "Can I tell you something without you overanalyzing it?" he asked. "Probably not," I said, smiling. "But go ahead." He rolled his eyes, then got serious. "I think I've always noticed guys that hung in the air between us. Not consciously," he continued, "but like comparing, looking, wondering." I stayed quiet. "I just buried it because it didn't fit." He swallowed. "And then you moved in across the hall. I felt that one in my chest. You didn't push me," he said. "You didn't try to make it something. You just let me sit in it." "That's the only way it works," I said softly. He nodded. "And I kept saying I wasn't like that," he added, almost amused now. "Like if I repeated it enough, it would override what I was feeling." I brushed my thumb lightly against his wrist. "Did it work?" He shook his head. "No," he admitted, "because every time I said it, my actions got louder." We both laughed quietly at that. But there was something deeper underneath it. Acceptance. Not a full identity overhaul. Not a label slapped on overnight. Just honesty. A few days later, we were at the gym again. Same locker room. Same mirrors. But this time, when our eyes met in the reflection, he didn't look away. He didn't tense. He didn't pretend. He stepped closer. "Still think you can tell when someone's trying not to look?" he asked, voice calm. I held his gaze in the mirror. "Yeah." He smirked faintly. "Guess I wasn't as subtle as I thought." "No," I said. "You really weren't." And for once, instead of denying it, he owned it. He grabbed his towel, slung it over his shoulder, and said, "I don't know exactly what I am yet." I stepped beside him. "You don't have to." He nodded once. "But I know I'm not lying anymore." And that was the first time Colin sounded completely sure of anything since this started. Not sure that he was straight. Not sure that he was gay. Just sure that whatever he felt, he wasn't going to pretend it was something else anymore. The shift after that was subtle but permanent. Colin didn't suddenly announce anything to the world. He didn't change the way he dressed or spoke or carried himself. If anything, he seemed calmer, like he wasn't constantly bracing for impact anymore. What changed was how he was with me. "You know what's weird?" he said. "What?" "I thought once I stopped denying this, everything would feel louder, more dramatic. And it's actually quieter." I smiled. "That's usually how honesty feels." He glanced at me, thoughtful. "I wish someone had told me that earlier." A few days later, he told me about his brother. Older, married, 2 kids. "He'd freak out," Colin said flatly. "Do you want to tell him?" I asked. "Not yet." He paused. "Maybe not ever. Or maybe someday. I don't know." "That's okay," I said. "This doesn't have to be public to be real." "You still worried I'll wake up one day and decide this was a mistake?" he asked quietly. I turned my head to look at him. "Are you worried about that?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm more worried about pretending it didn't matter." Weeks passed, then months. People noticed something. Friends asked questions. Not directly, but with looks, with pauses, with "So, you two are close, huh?" Colin never corrected them. One night, after a friend jokingly called me his boyfriend, Colin stiffened, then relaxed. Later, when we were alone, I asked, "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, just still getting used to how that word feels." "And how does it feel?" He smiled softly. "Not wrong." That was a big moment, bigger than he realized. The last time he ever said "I'm not like that" was during an argument. We hadn't been fighting, just circling a difficult truth. "What if this changes?" he asked. "What if I change?" "You will," I said. "People always do. And if I end up somewhere different than you?" I looked at him carefully. "Then we deal with it honestly." He frowned. "I hate that answer." "I know," he sighed, rubbing his face. "Part of me still wants a guarantee." "There isn't one." Silence. Then he said quietly, "I used to think saying, 'I'm not like that' protected me." I waited. "But it didn't," he continued. "It just kept me from actually living." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. "I don't know where this goes," he said. "But I know I don't want to hide anymore." I reached for him, pulling him into a slow, grounding embrace. "You don't have to," I said. And he didn't. Not after that. Because in the end, it wasn't the kiss or the touches, or even falling for another man that changed Colin the most. It was realizing that his actions had been telling him the truth all along. And finally, he was listening. It wasn't some dramatic coming-out speech that sealed it. It was a Tuesday. Rainy. Ordinary. The kind of day that doesn't feel important until you look back on it later. Colin had a rough day at work. A subcontractor bailed. Deadlines shifted. Everything stacked up at once. When he knocked on my door that night, he didn't say much. Just stepped inside and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "Long day?" I asked. He nodded. I handed him a beer. We sat on the couch, quiet at first. After a while, he looked at me and said, "My brother called today. That got my attention." "Yeah." He asked if I was seeing anyone. I stayed still. "What did you say?" He let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. I froze. I could picture it. Him gripping his phone too tight. Heart racing. That old instinct to dodge. I almost said no, he continued. Almost went with the easy answer. My chest tightened slightly. But, he looked at me. But I didn't. The room felt suddenly smaller, quieter. I told him, yeah, Colin said. I'm seeing someone. I didn't interrupt. Didn't rush him. He asked her name, Colin added, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. I raised an eyebrow. And I said, it's not a her. There it was. He didn't look scared telling me. He looked steady. He went quiet for a second, Colin said. Not angry, just surprised. And then he said, okay. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He didn't ask for details, Colin continued. Didn't freak out. Just said he wants me to be happy. He ran a hand through his hair, but it wasn't frantic like before. It was almost thoughtful. I don't even know why I was so terrified, he admitted. I think I was more scared of saying it out loud than I was of his reaction. Saying it out loud. That had always been the real line for him. He turned toward me fully then, one arm resting along the back of the couch behind my shoulders. Ian. Yeah. I don't think I'm straight. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shaky. It was calm. Certain. I didn't grin. Didn't make a big deal of it. I just nodded. Okay. He studied my face. That's it. What do you want? A parade? He laughed, relief flooding his features. No. He grew serious again. I don't know exactly what label fits, he said. Bye. Something else. I just know. I'm not who I thought I was. That happens, I said softly. He reached for my hand. And this time, when our fingers intertwined, there was no hesitation. No checking to see if anyone was watching. No invisible wall between who he said he was and who he actually felt like. I spent months saying I was definitely not like that, he said quietly. But every time I said it, I was thinking about you. I smiled faintly. I noticed. He shook his head, amused at himself. You were patient. I didn't want you to choose me out of fear or confusion. He squeezed my hand. I didn't, and I believed him, because this wasn't a moment of rebellion. It wasn't curiosity spiraling out of control. It wasn't alcohol or loneliness or impulse. It was steady, built slowly, earned. Colin didn't wake up one day and become someone new. He just stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. Later that night, we stood on the balcony, city lights glowing below us. You know what's funny? He said. What? I thought admitting this would make me feel exposed. And he kissed the side of my head gently. It just makes me feel honest. And that was it. Not fireworks. Not chaos. Just two guys standing under a quiet sky. One of them finally done arguing with himself. Because in the end, Colin never needed to prove he was definitely not like that. His actions had already told the truth. He just had to be brave enough to listen.